Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today in this very interesting session. I can see a lot of participants coming in. Thank you for joining us. My name is Christine, and I'm part of the Diversity and Inclusion team here at NASSCOM Foundation. A few instructions for all our participants before we start the session today. All the comments and views can be shared in the chat box. And if you have any questions to the panelists, please post that in your Q&A section. And this session is interpreted in sign language by Ria and Kushi from the Sign-Able team. Thank you, Ria, for being with us today. And for more details and for future episodes of Diversity and Inclusion Talks, please sign up on our social media channels. And on behalf of NASSCOM and NASSCOM Foundation, we would like to welcome you all to our Diversity and Inclusion Talk series with our industry leaders. We at NASSCOM engage with the industry, organization, and the government in fostering inclusion. We are engaged in driving various industry-level skilling programs for diverse groups, sensitization workshops for leaders and organizations, policy advocacy, best practices, and hosting global D&I summits, and many more. At NASSCOM Foundation, we firmly believe that a gender-inclusive workplace begins with championing our women in tech. And many of you joining us today have been a part of the Women Wizards Rule Tech program and contributed to this initiative in a very large way. Women have always contributed to advancements in science and technology. Most of you have read or probably watched this movie called The Hidden Figures, a very famous movie about the NASA team, about the astronauts. So this movie has been a very instrumental in making this clear, not just among practitioners, but also to societies more broadly, that this is an important origin story, as it challenges the myth that there are fewer women in tech and less diversity in tech workforce overall, owing to a pipeline problem. In today's episode of our discussion on catalyzing gender equality in tech workplace, we will deep dive into how imperative it is for organizations to achieve gender equality, not only because it's fair or the right thing to do, but because it's also linked to a country's overall economic performance. And on that note, I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists for today's session. We have Professor Vasanthi Srinivasan from IIM Bangalore. She's a woman who dons many hats and is a role model for people to follow. Her research interests are women on boards, business and human rights, and HRM in rapid growth contexts. She is a distinguished alumni of XLRI Jamshedpur. Her massive open online course titled People Management on the edX platform was recognized among the top 100 courses by Class Central and the top 10 HRM courses by Digital Defined to 2021. She's been associated with the Indian Academy of Management since 2009 and was a past president as well. She also runs Tanmantra, which she keeps very close to her heart, which is a women in leadership program for senior women leaders. The program is in its sixth edition and has over 180 women alumni from leading Indian companies. Thank you so much, Professor Vasanthi, for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Christine.
And we also have a second guest. We welcome Supriya Danda, who is the executive board member with ABS India, a business leader with more than 25 years of corporate experience in leading technologies. As Western Digital, SanDisk, Alcatel, Lucent, and General Electric, her last assignment was country manager, India, and vice president for Western Digital, provider of data storage solutions. She believes in architecting a bold vision, articulating a clear strategic intent, defining business imperatives, and rallying leadership teams to innovate, think big, and execute as one team. An authentic leader, passionate about technology, she believes in nurturing relationships and forming a win-win partnership. She is equally passionate about working with tech startups and catalyzing the startup ecosystem in India. So thank you so much, Supriya, for being with us today.
Happy to be here, Christine. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'd also like to welcome Mr. Sunil David to the forum. He is an IoT thought leader. He currently advertises and consults AI and IoT startups. Is an alumni of Symbiosis Institute of Management Studies and carries a very vast experience of over 28 years in the IT and telecom industry, has been a recipient of number of awards and recognitions from various from various industry bodies in recognition for his work in digital technology advocacy, digital skilling initiatives for women through his work with NASSCOM Foundation. His contribution and inputs to academia are sought on curriculum on emerging technologies like IoT. Sunil is also a very great writer and has contributed to articles for leading business publications and media houses on IoT, AI, digital transformation, metaverse, and future of work. Thank you so much, Sunil, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
And also, we like to welcome our very own leader, Nidhi Basin, our CEO with NASSCOM Foundation. Nidhi wears many hats and has proven skills in program and team management, regulatory understanding of CSR law, finance and compliance, among others, a leader in social development sector, and is extremely passionate about providing equal opportunities to all, technology for social good, and women and youth development. And at NASSCOM Foundation, Nidhi supports and works towards pivoting the organization into focused strategic growth by providing employability-driven skills to the underdeserved youth, encouraging and incubating tech for social good, and fostering women entrepreneurship. She has been working towards our vision to build a truly inclusive India through technology and partnerships with the industries, with NGOs, emerging social enterprises, and the government. Thank you so much, Nidhi, for being here. If you're on the call, I think she's running late. Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Christine. Really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not the least, I'd like to welcome Roy Thomas, our Diversity and Inclusion Lead with NASSCOM Foundation. Roy has played various strategic leadership roles. He's passionate about inclusion of marginalized community inclusion in workspace. In the past, he has worked as a program manager for D&I at Dell Technologies and the global lead of D&I with Pulse Secure. Through his work, he would like to be able to better influence mindsets around diversity and inclusion, such as to bridge the gap between leadership skills to help stakeholders such as corporates and third-party agencies, nonprofits and groups dedicated for the D&I causes. We are very proud to have him at NASSCOM Foundation and to be a part of his team. So on that note, I'd like to hand this forum over to Roy and to take it over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to all the panelists here. It's really amazing. We have a huge crowd joined in for this discussion, and this is I'm very sure it's going to be an amazing conversation today. Talking about gender equality. Just to set a little context before we deep dive into some of the topics here, there's an accompanying economic imperative for including women more fully into society and the workplace, and women's participation in the workforce is no longer perceived as a social issue alone, but also a business issue, which costs women, companies, and ultimately entire economies. So female talent remains one of the most underutilized business resources, either squandered through lack of progression or untapped from the onset. So before we sort of jump into our questions and discussions, I would like to take a minute to show a quick video which focuses on the reality on women in workplace today. All right. So these are some very alarming numbers, right? When we talk about 39% of women in internship levels, and then drilling down to 26 in the actual workforce, and then about 10.9% in the leadership, right? The facts clearly tell us that gender diverse leadership is still a distant dream. So I think I will go with Professor Vasanthi on the first question. Why has the progress on this front still been very slow?
Yeah. Thanks, Roy, for this. And I'm really grateful that you put up that video, because sometimes, right, it's videos like this which help you to reflect for a minute. And I was just telling the team earlier that this is my 22nd year on working with gender diversity. And so in some ways, it just seems so strange that in 2001, we hosted an event called Women in Management and Technology at IIM Bangalore. And we had 78 women. And we were super excited because that was really a big number. And as I look at the numbers going up now, 605, and we are hosting a tech event. Believe you me, Roy, that is the moment, the penny dropped for me that yes, things have moved, but they need to move so much more. So it's just a question of what perspective we come from and how much have we been able to do in 20 years. I think that's a mindful stock taking, because constantly we are beating up everything. We need to beat up and we need to do that more. But having said that, I think it's just circumspect. So I'm going to kind of use my research basically to be able to slice and dice to respond to your question, why has it been slow? At the outset, I think we need to recognize that what we are attempting to do is social change. And social change has never happened in one generation. It's often happened over multiple generations. So we need to have patience to be able to move with it. Having said that, I'm also going to give you a second perspective, which is that I think why it is hitting us so much today is the fact that everywhere there are claims of India becoming the third largest economy of the world, 2030, 2040. And one assumes that as economic development happens, social and human capital development occurs for all. I think today the challenge before us is GDP is growing, but on all metrics, women development is dropping. And this is a paradox for which only India can find India's solutions. Okay. So sometimes we often compare best practices globally. Okay. Yes, there are some best practices, but at the end of the day, the pathways to why women drop out of careers or stay in the careers, while the destination is the same and everywhere they're talking about 10%, 15%, nowhere in the world do you have 50% representation in senior leadership of women. It's important to be a little mindful that the pathways to reach there are very different. Having said that, one of the brightest spots right now in the horizon is the fact that more women are getting into school, more women are getting into college, and more women are coming into workforce. And your own data shows 34% now is a significant number. So in itself, we have to look at that journey. I love the fact that in India, we still believe that anybody who does science is intelligent and they need to get equal opportunities. Okay. So we are not carrying the baggage of saying STEM is not for girls. So we get some of the brightest minds in the country in science and tech. Okay. So the question we have to ask is, what more can we do to speeden up this entire journey of bringing in more women, retaining more women? My research basically, and I'm going to focus just on women in technology, not so much go down the whole path, which is that there seem to be basically three challenges. And these challenges kind of get salience over the stages of a woman's career between early, mid-career, and senior leadership. The first one that we are able to see very clearly is the fact that, and my own research shows very clearly that women's educational identity is quite stark now, that most people want their daughters to be educated. So which is what is increasing the enrollment ratios in all third-tier education. But unfortunately, this translation of educational identity for women to a job identity for women, that it's important that women hold jobs, that translation is not embedded in the minds of most parents. It's good to have very good education because marriage market, unfortunately, rewards you very well with higher education. So how do we translate that into an identity of job and employment and economic participation? That's a shift that needs to occur, and it needs to happen very quickly so that you can at least buy time for 4 years. So for early career women, it's just about job identity. But the very same job identity needs to evolve into career identity. And that journey of educational identity to job identity and employment identity to career identity, that transition, how do you make it happen? To my mind, that today, if you ask me, that's the biggest issue, because all organizations are complaining that women are dropping out at the middle. They are not saying we don't have women at the base. So there's no problem in terms of bringing women. It's just a question of keeping them to continue to have. The second dimension, and it's beaten to death, and we have to recognize we are a patriarchal society, deeply gendered. So what can we do? And I've been thinking about this, except that what can we do as organizations to provide flexibility, flexible managers, flexible thinking in terms of just flexible options? Yeah, I think if we do some shift there, okay, and world over research says women's careers are non-linear. Organizations have been constructed for the average man, not for the women. Women's lives have ebbs and flows, okay? So therefore, how do you account for those 7 years? And come on, I mean, it's not a joke, right? If I have to choose between being a mother and being the greatest tech coder in the world, give me a break. I have just 8 years window to become a mother. So in some ways, I think we have to recognize those realities in terms of flexibility. The third part of it, and we all talk about it, being in tech, being an expert, and I cannot tell you what a challenge it is in just keeping yourself abreast. In my most recent study, when we were looking at men and women in tech, and we were trying to understand what are the barriers to women looking at tech, one of the things that came is no time to invest on oneself. Women actually told me that they benefited more from NASSCOM Forum and the upskilling that's happening through these interventions that NASSCOM does than they would have ever been able to do if it was on their own. Another final one is, and I'm going to stop there, is that we need more women role models to not just come out to say how successful they have been, but I think we are past that stage of proving successful women. That's hardly the problem. The problem is really for women to have candid conversations, to be able to say, this is what I did to return. This is what we can come together to do to bring women back. Today, if I see it's coaching women technologists during their slack periods to come back and perform. So one size does not fit all. We need to do all of this to kind of accelerate. And let me pause there and come back. Yeah, over to you.
Very, very interesting perspective, Professor Vasanthi. Social change is not fast, but also, the time it will take to close gender gap, grew by 36 years in the last 12 months. And this is according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report in 2021, right? But nevertheless, there are significant pockets of progress happening. And as we all know, there's a huge agenda on every organization and some amazing efforts put in the last decade, and they continue to progress in terms of bridging the gender gap, right? So Supriya, you are a leader with, who has strongly advocated for gender change for many years now. You have played key leadership roles at corporates, associations, with foundations, social sectors, and also as an entrepreneur, right? So would like to hear from you on some of the examples of positive change for gender in the workplace that you have noticed in the past 5 years, and how do you expect the workplace to change over the next 5 years?
Thank you, Roy. It was fascinating. First, happy to be here. Second, fascinating to hear Professor Vasanthi because it looks like she's captured it all. I'm just going to pick a few snippets from here and there and see if I can make sense and add value to the forum. But she said it. She said it. It's an educational identity that exists, and therefore we have to translate that. So let me begin first with that, take off from there, and something you said very importantly, the World Economic Forum, the gender gap report, the world, index as to where we are. Let me pick those two threads and see if I can build on it. See, when you look at the first movement of feminists, when it started, 1848, I mean, come on, we weren't even independent. Men and women weren't independent, across the world. It started in US, so leave aside anything else being discussed. Then talk about India. I think a huge positive thing, education is not an issue. Women in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, education is not an issue. I think that's brilliant. Be it whatever reason, parents are enforcing it, it's being discussed, it's being spoken about, and therefore out of every 10 that are there, I think the multiple reports kind of say different data, but we can easily assume that 50% of women are there, and if there's 50, so I think we got nearly 50-50 there. It could be 46, 54, it doesn't matter. The numbers are definitely not 10 and 12. So I think we have a brilliant, I would say that is progress, Roy. Corporate cannot hire if you aren't educated. And I represent technology sector. We can't hire if you aren't an engineer, broadly. So let's say that is a huge part and piece of the puzzle that is solved. That's a plus. Now, instead of taking a 5-year snapshot, I'll take 2-year snapshot, 2.5, because pre and post pandemic, a lot of stuff has changed. My worry, though, I will say that with a caution and a disclaimer, is my worry, my heart beats really loud and I may have palpitation if I see that the corporate are choosing not to learn from pandemic. When I see this huge pandemic has happened, which is global experiment, all of our lives were at risk, none of us knew the solutions. There was this huge future of work being discussed, hybrid being discussed. But when I sit down in conversations and I hear, ho gaya pandemic, it's enough and done, let's get back to work, my heart just skips a beat. One, for the human factor that people have figured out there is purpose and then there's life. Job is means to an end. The fact that job is an end, I think that's a huge wake-up call that's happened gender alike. For women, it's extremely important because good or bad, child rearing facility, child rearing skill is only with women. So those 5-7 years they need to take away. But I make a difference here between childbearing and rearing. I don't think men understand that, or women don't understand it either. Professor Vasanthi said it's patriarchy. I say patriarchy is deep-seated in women too. Patriarchy is not about men's minds. It's enough about women's minds too. If my husband sometimes enters, the kitchen, and I definitely want him to enter, but when he's cleaning the dishes, he does it day 1. It's a smile. Day 2, I'm like, why are you doing it? Day 3, leave it. I'll do it. And I have to put a thonk on my head to say, stop it, Supriya. It is his job equally. Who said you're suited to this? Have I seen my mom, my grandmother doing it? So I think we need to all be part of the change, Roy. It's not going to happen otherwise. So I would say there's a huge social fabric that needs to change. In summation, there is education changing, the employment needs to change. Post-pandemic, corporate are discussing diversity, gender diversity, equality in terms of teams representation is a hugely discussed topic. Today, every forum is keen to discuss. However, the solutions aren't many to find. They aren't. Entry level is not an issue. Professor Vasanthi said that, but people are still figuring the key. The lock is there. They haven't figured the key to say, how do we make Nidhi stay? How do we make Professor Vasanthi stay? How do we say Supriya stay? How do we, if they stay in the mid-career, they can grow? And I think the problem lies partly with corporate, partly with the way we are brought up. The choice between being a great coder and a mother, it naturally assumes we'll choose mother, but I'm sure there are enough today who will choose to be a coder too. And I think that's what we need to wake up to. For me, it's not being natural. It's a natural process to be a mother, but I think there's a choice built in. So corporate needs to be flexible, yes. Please don't say pandemic is past and we haven't learned anything. I think let's continue to learn. Let's continue to have flexibility. Women will need to step out and be allowed, facilitated, welcome to step in. That's the part of the puzzle that needs to get solved. Today they are knocking, but there aren't so many doors. Great programs. And I think NASCOM and you guys Foundation and Nidhi under her leadership, you guys are doing fascinating work. Continue, because that's the only way this is going to solve. The other part of the puzzle is the ambition being with women. I think women, my personal belief, and I having interacted with many out of experience, I was recently at IIM Bangalore, Professor Vasanthi. How was it that I missed meeting with you? I was taking corporate session. I was with Professor Srinivasan, went there for a session. And there are these brilliant 20 plus women with 15 years plus of experience. And I asked a question saying, how many of you want to be a CEO? I did not see one hand raised. And Professor Srinivasan and I are looking at each other saying, are you kidding me? Everybody wanted to be N-1, but that N position, the CEO, the apex, it was like, no. So while I say this, the good part is when I close the session, and it's not a compliment to me and how my session went, it was somebody talking to them. It could have been anybody talking to them. It's not and then they said, okay, 70% of them said yes. Where is the ambition? Why do we think these are complicated jobs and only men can do it? Because all around we are seeing men. And that, I think, imagery needs to change. Media plays a huge role in it. There are so many women who are leading businesses, but we still are full of, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates. And we are so obsessed with these men and Satya Nadella. They're all brilliant men. But I wish we speak equally of the women who are leading great ventures. We are just so focused. So imagery needs to change. Visualization needs to come in. Corporate flexibility, women's ambition. My sense is it is like a full jar which has multiple holes. Every leak needs to be plugged by institutional, individual, corporate, academia. Unless we plug all, we are not going to see the change. If you plug 5 but leave 1 leak, well, the water is going to flow out. Women are, going to exit. So I think it's all in is the game here, Roy, and I'm seeing positivity. But I think I'll keep my hopes on. But I think all of us need to do our bit. I would close at that, Roy.
Absolutely, Supriya. I think that's a very brilliant perspective, and maybe moving, our thought process is slightly different from the corporates here. As much as there is workforce focus in the corporates, it is also important how we're looking at gender development in the rural areas of India, right? And NASSCOM Foundation has a very strong focus on that subject. So talking about inclusion for all, or taking inclusion to the last mile, with a very ambitious target of touching 100 million lives in the next 5 years, and a huge percentage of our beneficiaries are women, right? So I would like to direct this question to our own leader, Nidhi Basin here. How do you envision NASSCOM Foundation contributing back to bridge the gender gap in the future of technology or of the country?
Thanks, Roy. You are very well aware how passionate I am about that conversation. But firstly, I think it's been, these are conversations we've had in the past, but when I was listening to Dr. Vasanthi and Supriya, I was like, okay, I don't think we have enough of these conversations, and we really need to do it much more. So thank you for bringing up those points. But talking about, yes, NASSCOM Foundation and our aim to impact 100 million lives, I know it's very ambitious, but can we afford not to be ambitious in a country like India with a 1.4 billion population, where we are talking about an inclusive growth, and we know that most of this population lives in the rural areas. So, we need to touch those lives. So I think, yes, we have, being a part of the NASSCOM ecosystem, I feel we also have the responsibility to take that kind of ambition, that kind of a goal. And of course, this is about, Professor Vasanthi spoke about social change doesn't happen overnight. Of course, it's a long period. And coming to that, I think we're talking about here conversations where we don't have enough women in tech, right? So if we start working at the grassroots level, at the rural level now, we are probably getting the country ready for future. So yes, while a part of this goal is to also have more and more women in tech today, more and more women in STEM today. But a lot of this is also towards probably what will happen 10 years down the line, because if we are talking about making more entrepreneurs in the rural areas, if you're talking about making the rural women digitally literate, we are talking about digitally literate mothers will make sure that they will be more aware, because they would probably have access to more information, and that will make sure that their girls, in fact, what girls, their boys also, right, are more aware about this, and they will encourage them to study just beyond just probably school level, and even within the college, maybe somewhere we'll start this conversation about why you should have a career. So, so the whole idea is not only to address the urban women, the idea is to address where most of our population lives, and I think that's what our whole aim is. And of course, we have initiatives like this, where I think where we are playing that role of talking about how women can actually take the next step. The fact that this is a third cohort, I know from the last two cohorts also, these kind of conversations, the whole, the program itself would have made a lot of women think about leadership, would have actually made, Supriya what said that, probably even if 2 women out of that would say they can be a CEO, I think our job is done. So definitely, and I think we need more women to come forward. We definitely, and that's our role. So when we are talking about skilling for women in college and university, start that conversation. It's not only about your study, but start that conversation about why you should have a career. Why you should be independent. So it's from that point of view, and also in terms of working right from the rural level with their parents, tier 2, tier 3 cities, working along with their parents, so that it doesn't become only a certificate to get married. It is about really making a choice and having a career out here. Yeah.
Brilliant, Nidhi. I'm every time I think about this ambitious target, makes me really proud to be working for an organization with this and to work for a leader like you. It's really amazing. So, maybe focusing on little about mentorship and these kind of programs, it's very critical, right? For male leaders to be allies, to be mentors in these organizations. So there's a fact, that male champions genuinely believe in fairness, gender equity, and the development of the talent in their organization, and that are easily identified by female leaders for critical roles they play in advancing women's career. And Sunil is one such person who has contributed back to the gender development program that we have, the W2RT program at NASSCOM Foundation. And so I will turn to Sunil on this one, right? So Sunil, mentoring is a very powerful tool, and if you want to take everyone with you and no one is left behind. So as a male ally for bridging the gender gap, why is it important for more male leaders to contribute back to mentorship and advancement of women in technology?
Right. Thanks, Roy, for that question. And firstly, I'd like to thank you and the NASSCOM Foundation team for inviting me to be part of this panel, a very stellar panel. Absolutely, Roy. I think the male leaders have to contribute towards this cause. And I think as you started off the whole session with showcasing how important it is for organizations to have a diversity, right? I mean, you talk about profitability of organizations going up, right? So one is, of course, you need the diversity of thought and perspective that is needed, that will come in with more women coming into leadership positions, but also to meet specific business metrics, right? I think most research have shown that the more diverse the workforce is, the better is the profitability, the higher are the revenues, the better is the earnings per share and all that stuff. So I think there's enough research to prove that, Roy. Now, Professor Vasanthi talked about women needing role models, right? So I think we've had enough of conversation about why you need, more women in tech. And I just wanted to use this time to share with you some real examples of women leaders who really made their mark, So the first example which I want to share is, and actually before I share, Roy, these examples, you talked about mentorship, right? So I think what is very, very important is that men should not just be mentors, but even coaches, Roy. I think what we really need to show women is the potential that they have, right? So, and they need that nudge. When women wants to take up that higher level positions, they need that nudge. And that this old cliche which says that today women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. We need to kind of flip that around. We need more men to sponsor women, and I think enough of mentoring of women. They need those positions. Men have to act as sponsors to get them to those positions. I think that is very, very important. And I just wanted to share a couple of examples to kind of highlight that point. And the first example which I'd like to share is Mary Beth Asher. I mean, while I was in AT&T, I just left them a few months back. I used to report to Mary Beth Asher. She's now the AVP of the region based in Hong Kong. And she's been around for almost 30 years in the industry, and most of it with AT&T. Mary Beth Asher today handles multiple roles. So when I joined her team 5 years back, she was head of the IoT business, very, very important unit within AT&T and one of the fastest growing units for AT&T. And the leadership had trust and confidence in her that she'll deliver. Apart from handling the IoT business, she was also the AVP for the South Korean region. She was also the chief of staff for the regional vice president. So before any challenges or problems are brought to the topmost leader in APAC region, it used to come to her desk before it goes actually to the top. And very recently, she took up additional responsibilities as well, handling the entire India sales team and even the Taiwan sales team. And what was really the factor which contributed, Roy, to her success and for the management to have faith and belief in her leadership was because her boss, Bernadette, who's the regional vice president of APAC, he believed in her and he gave her those opportunities for her to take up those roles and flourish. And today she's one of those outstanding leaders. And I would also owe a lot of my success to her because when I was working under her, and the first opportunity that I had to work under a woman leader, I really thrived because she gave me that freedom. She gave me that environment where I can actually grow and build my career. And what success that I've got, I really have to attribute a lot of that to Mary Beth. Second example, which I wanted to cite, Roy, is Mrs. Sheena Mori, a well-known name in the industry. And if you see the career progression, Roy, she worked with the SAP for many years. Later on, she joined Dell. And then last year, she was made the Chief Operating Officer of Broadridge Financial Technology Services. And lo and behold, this year, she was appointed as the CEO of Broadridge, one of the largest fintech companies. It's an amazing story. In fact, I had the opportunity and privilege to be a part of a panel a couple of days back, which was hosted by Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, which was at the Indo-US Business Summit, which was the virtual session, and I had a chance to be part of the panel. But again, I know a great story of how male leaders, male allies really contributed to her growth, and that also includes her husband, Mr. Alok Ori, who's incidentally the MD of Dell. So I hope I've answered your question, Roy, by giving these real examples of women leaders who really had male allies to help them in their career progression.
Absolutely, Sunil. I mean, these are some really amazing stories. And talking about Sheena Mori, I've had the opportunity to work under her, together with her at some point when I was in Dell. And I continue to do so, even if we look at NASSCOM and the foundation, our president is a women leader. Our CEO, Nidhi Basan, is a women leader. So I've been working under women for a long time, and also, doing my best to be an ally to help other women, in the workplace. So also talking about mentorship and leadership programs, all of that, Professor Vasanthi, you've been instrumental in building many leadership programs for organizations, right? You've helped organizations build some amazing pipeline of inclusive leaders. So there is a need for leaders to step up and close gender gaps in career advancement and eliminate workplace discrimination. So according to you, what have been some key strategies in organizational behavior, HR practices, and leadership trainings and advanced programs for bridging gender gap?
Let me kind of bucket the things that I am seeing now into three big buckets. The first one is, I think there's just more mindfulness among key leaders. So I see two strategies that are used by organizations. One is the quota-driven approach, which works for organizations that have strong systems, processes to drive those targets across right up to the last employee. Then there are organizations where there is a lot of mindful conversation happening and trying to figure out how do we do this without quotas, but in a more deliberate and systematic manner. It doesn't matter where it comes from, whether it comes from driven or whether it comes from mindfulness. There is a place where both these organizations end up almost looking similar. And that, I think, is the place of HR policies. I think the one size fits all approach, and I'm deeply concerned about that. See, the whole recruitment process that organizations have had all these years is about identifying best people, and often we do that through technical tests. Everything on coding in particular tells us that a BA literature, most of the people with strong arts and humanities background turn out, if you've studied philosophy and coding, go hand in hand. Okay. So more and more world over, when I meet people in tech, right, they come from such diverse spheres that our obsession in some ways to have these pre-required qualifications at entry level, I think is becoming a bottleneck for all forms of diversity. Forget about gender. For persons with disability, it's going to become even more difficult. Okay, those job descriptions are for male, middle class, urban engineers. So that I think, so if you start unbundling each of the HRM processes, and I'm going to give you just one example to illustrate. A large organization, one of my women leaders as a project took up saying, if this organization has hired from campuses for 25 years, why is it that we don't have enough women leaders in the pipeline? When she went across the organization, and what her research primarily showed that there were innumerable women in all staff function. It's only in the line functions that grow into the CEO roles that there were no women. So then she did further analysis to look at where are they disappearing, because at the entry level, almost up to mid-career, they are all there in operational roles. She just went back and she looked at it, and she looked at what is the performance process like. Very simple. You need to have 3 years of outstanding performance before you can be shortlisted for promotion. Which woman between the ages of 28 and 35 will have 3 consecutive years of outstanding performance to come in there? When she just did that analysis, she realized that close to 45% of the women just dropped out because of this one criteria. The organization went back internally and looked at it, and all that they did is they said, out of 5 years, you should have had outstanding in any 3 years. And automatically the numbers went up by 22%. So are our policies gendered? Look at the training and the selection for training processes. Okay, every single one of them have been gendered because it's been largely male companies, right? So one of the big places where we have to reimagine is the entire set of policies. And last piece that I'm going to spend a little bit of time on is, how do you make continuous, how do we get women leaders to look at careers? What conversations should anybody, men, women, have, which actually, I'm building on Supriya's point on aspiration. In one of my classes, I asked students saying, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Believe you me, nobody had asked them that question. Yeah. And world over research says that women are rarely, young girls are rarely asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Okay. So in some ways, this whole question about where do you want to be 5 years from now? Where do you want to be? And to my mind, it's allies like Sunil, or it's male mentors, male sponsors in the organization who can just enable those conversations by just asking, where do you see yourself in this hierarchy? I think any manager can do it. So the whole notion of being inclusive in the way you mentor, I think is going to become very, very crucial. So do we have to reimagine in the way we actually do our practices? Yes, we do. Do we need more inclusive leaders? Yes, we do. Do we also need to equip women? And I'm now beginning to see that there are several self-limiting beliefs that we carry. I can't do this. I can't raise my hand. What if will others think of me? My whole life has been conditioned by those, right? Now, suddenly for me to raise up my hand, speak up, ask, negotiate, those are not qualities that come naturally to me. Okay. So in a way, no, organizations also need to be fair and be seen to be fair. If you know that this is not available, how do you make sure that it happens, right? No point in saying speak up. And that's something I can't understand. How can somebody suddenly speak up overnight? I'm not being trained to do so, right? So, I mean, quite simply, I'm sorry, this is a soapbox and I got very excited about it. But let me take 1 minute to say that we see no differences between men and women when they are in our classrooms. Zero difference. Oh, women are these generals. No, not at all. Oh, women can't think logically, they can't do this and nonsense. So basically, there are no gender differences in terms of competence and capabilities. The question, therefore, we have to now address is saying, how do we crack the systems to make them equal for all? And if we cannot crack gender, believe you me, Roy, no point in talking about cracking persons with disability, LGBTQ. You're never going to do it. Never. Yeah. Sorry. Over to you after that.
Absolutely makes sense, Professor Vasanthi. If we have to, bring those, equal opportunities for all, or even modify these HR practices, it requires some amount of organizational behavior and different kind of thinking and change mindsets of people, right? So, I'll come back to Supriya on this, because Supriya has been, in the corporate sector, apart from mentoring, training, providing nurturing environment. Do you think mindsets and corporate policies also need an overhaul to nurture women leaders?
Oh, Roy, I'm just going to take a cue from what Professor Vasanthi said. First, we need more conversations like that. And Professor Vasanthi, if I may stay with you for a second, you got charged up, you got passionate. And guess what you did? I mean, that was brilliant to see you in your natural element, I assume, because this is a topic that most of us are passionate about, because we are biased about it, we are living it day to day. And there is no way I can be unbiased about it. It's almost like I say, when I got the gender lens, there's no removing it. I see the world through that. I see my dad through that, my husband through that, my brother through that, my son through that. That's how I see it. And I think there's no removing it. Now, the beauty is sometimes we feel this passion can be misunderstood. We can be seen as branded, and therefore we step back and we try to be politically correct. We try to be diplomatic about it. And Roy, that's where the problem lies. And that's where I'm going to start with the corporate. Having spent 25 years, my first 5-6 years was I didn't see any difference. I didn't see any discrimination. Come 6-7 years, and I saw that, and I saw loads of that. And come as country head, I saw enough and more of that. Enough and more of that, especially being in deep tech. My most experience has been in technology companies. There is a reason why women in STEM education is brilliant, 54% or 50, but there is women in STEM core deep tech is only 15%. Where are those 29-39% women going? I mean, is somebody asking this question? Because I know I am asking and I want to dedicate my life to it, but I know there are others asking and we need to join forces. Where are those women going? There is deep-seated bias in this technology world, which is led by only men. There is enough and more research in my PhD when I'm looking at it in the entrepreneurship. 2% of the world's funding goes to women, world, not only India. India, I don't even know whether it's 2% or 0.2% or 0.002%. Well, 98% goes to men. Now, if I start a firm, brilliant. But if I ask Sunil, can you join me? The chances of me getting funding will suddenly get raised. It's another 9%, 11% chances. But it's only Supriya, 2%. So why are they? Entire FDI, the money comes in only to the high-tech sector. Women are nearly absent in high-tech sector. Well, that's the world of entrepreneurship we breathe day in, day out at a world level. And India is actually abysmally low in this. Coming to corporate now, so because if entrepreneurship is any different, trust me, it's not. It's a very gory situation out there. Coming to corporate, mindset needs to change tremendously. I simply ask this question. We could put a driverless car on the road. We could figure out a space shuttle to go and actually make it so commercial that we are now sending you and me to space, if obviously you and I have those kind of, banks to break. But we can't figure gender. I mean, what is subconscious bias about it? Let's be brave enough and bold enough to say there is a conscious bias. There is nothing subconscious about it. Consciously, we are keeping women at the door. The physical distance, the spatial distance of this entire thinking to say, Roy belongs in office, but Supriya belongs at home. I am educated, but I still belong at home. That's where I am seen. But Roy belongs in office. With due respect to you, Roy, and with due respect to me. I think that distance in the mind hasn't been traveled, Roy. That hasn't been traveled. Now the point is, earlier we weren't educated. Now we are educated, empowered, but yet we are not able to break in. Just imagine the frustration that women live with. First, I didn't have the tools, the skills, the abilities, and the ambition. Well, now I have all of that, and yet I'm kept out. So that's where the issue is. And all of that is with the corporate. The same corporate that invests millions of dollars in R&Ds and funding and can, like I said, put a driverless car on the road, is putting a driverless truck on the road, is looking at servers from moving to IoT to edge. We are doing all of that cutting edge technology. But you know what? When all these great CEOs and corporate honchos and board people sit together, they scratch their head and they look at me. Supriya, how do we do this? I love the innocence on the face, but internally I smirk. I'm like, you guys don't want to do it. Because if you wanted to do it, God bless you. You can easily find ways to do it. So that needs to shift. Shift policy, system, structure. Professor Vasanthi has spoken about, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to say only one thing. It needs to start at the top. That's what I always say. Diversity inclusion is a CEO agenda. It is not a human resources agenda. It is not a DEI expert agenda. Structure is hugely important in the HR system. Where does your job structurally report to? Well, if you're DNI expert, reports to CEO, brilliant, but most often than not, it does not. And you don't even have great qualified people kind of running those roles. And they don't understand business. The second thing, it's a nice to do in terms of it gives us return on profitability. All those matrices, the reports need to go into the dustbin. When we hire men, we don't ask a single equation to justify which parameter on balance sheet or P&L sheet is better. But when we hire women, we need to do that. Excuse, why? Same brain, legs, capabilities, faculties, and why is it that you need to justify reports on, if you hire Supriya, your profitability go high, but if you hire Roy, excuse me, that was the right thing to do. Hiring women and an equal opportunity is the right thing to do. Please don't justify as to why you need to hire women. Women and men in India, we are 48%, men are 54%. Well, it's equality in all measures, unless we talk about another thing as to genocide and all. We're not talking about all of that. But if that wasn't happening in certain states, trust me, we would be all equal. We would be 50-50. God is creating us in equal numbers. We humans are interfering with us. So I think that's the second part. CEO agenda. And second, it's the right thing to do. Please hire women. The third thing, of course, is mindset. You will realize women are being hired. We are fixing women. We are coaching them, developing them, giving them mentors, giving them sponsors. But what are we doing with men who are occupying 85% of those positions and 90% of the corporate CEO chairs? Is anyone working on them? The answer is no. Very little answers you'll get. Nobody's working on culture piece. Nobody's working on CEO mindset. No board is asking if you don't do that. Wherever is being asked, you are seeing change. So I think these are three things that somebody needs to hold these people accountable. And by the way, even if there are 10% women occupying CEO chairs, I think they also need to be held accountable. It's not about men or women. It's the chair needs to, to be held accountable. So I think unless we do that, you and I will be sitting here along with Professor Vasanthi and Nidhi and of course Sunil, and be sharing the same conversation 20 years down the line. I'll be a lot more frustrated and a lot more vocal and a lot more cynical and a lot more gray in my head and completely wrinkled in my view also and wrinkled in my conversation. But this conversation, Roy, is not going to change. And a final closure, gender, my God, we haven't figured. So I shudder to think what an LGBTQ life is all about. What a person with disability life is all around. Because when we are able, in the Hindi, there was an ad, if I can say this, I think Buddha, Bacha, or, women all saman and all that. There used to be one ad, older children and women are all put together. Why? I'm so different from a child. I'm so different from an old person. Why are we bundled together? Our ministers today still do it. So I think we need to be treated equal. Mindsets need to be washed with whatever soap is available. And CEOs, about time you own up the agenda and stop hiding under the subconscious layer. There is nothing subconscious about this, is my view.
Very well said, Supriya. I mean, it definitely has to come drill down from the boardroom to make it a reality. But in interest of time, we have another 4 minutes. So I'll quickly, go to Nidhi talking a little about taking inclusion to the last mile. Now, there are so many research papers suggest that if women play an active role, we can definitely reach the GDP goal of 5 trillion. Do you see that vision becoming a reality? And how similar or different are the challenges that women face at the last mile and in the boardroom?
So Roy, I know since we are short of time, I'll just answer that very quickly. So there is a positive and a negative here. So I'll start with the negative first, saying that we are talking about achieving SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, by 2030. But SDG 5 talks about women equality, but we are $2.64 trillion short of our funding need to achieve those SDGs. So, and I know that women is an issue which will probably take or not take priority out here. So yes, that's the negative side. The positive side is that we are talking about it. We are acknowledging the fact that women can play a major role in contributing to the GDP. So at least we are talking about it. We're acknowledging that. And there are efforts, whether from the private sector or the government sector, which is going towards achieving that. And so yes, it's work in progress. We cannot achieve what we probably the backlog of hundreds of years, we cannot achieve that in 10 years, but at least it's work in progress. We are moving towards that. Even the fact that whether in an urban area or even in the rural area, like how we are, when NASCOM Foundation is working with women entrepreneurs to ensure that the number of women entrepreneurs grow and they upscale and they sustain their businesses. These are all conversations and movement towards making sure that women continue to or grow in terms of contributing to the GDP. But coming to the boardroom, I think whether you're working in the rural area or you're part of a boardroom, in a way, struggles are similar, right? In a way, because it is actually deep rooted into our culture, the patriarchy, the way the women think, right? The way we all have grown up. So Priya gave that example of if her husband washes utensils one day, second day, probably she feels guilty, right? So I think it's a lot about us also, while we'll have people like you and Sunil who will come and support women, and there are many CEOs who are looking at male CEOs who are looking at building women, supporting them. But I think somewhere, this whole conversation about whether a woman from rural area or a woman in the boardroom needs to come forward, it needs to start from us. We need to believe more in us. We need to stop feeling guilty about not taking a gap when we are going to have babies, right? We need to, it's okay. And I hear a lot of CEOs saying, yes, I made a sacrifice to make it big, but it's not a sacrifice. Why are you guilty about it, right? And I think that's what we need to say. It's okay, a man doesn't feel guilty, so why are you feeling guilty about leaving your child in childcare? It's okay, right? And so I don't think that first part of letting go of guilt and believing in ourselves, I think right from rural woman to urban woman will really be a great step towards bridging this whole gap.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, conversations like these definitely don't end within 60 minutes, even though we plan to cover all the questions. We're almost on time, and I know a couple of leaders here have a hard stop. Sunil has to run for another in-person event somewhere. But however, for the participants, I know there's been a lot of questions flowing in for the panelists. So we do have a registration form or a survey form at the end of this session. So, there's an open field. Put in your questions there. Relevant questions, we will go back to the panelists and come back to you with answers. Apologize for not being able to take questions. And thank you everybody for joining in. We will continue to do these conversations on a regular basis. Do leave in your details with us. Follow us on social media so that you're updated about all the conversations. And this was amazing to be with all of you leaders, and very insightful thoughts and concepts that was spoken today. And once again, thank you everybody for taking the time, and have a good day ahead.